She had the softest eyes anyone on the station had ever seen. Big, brown, warm, like sunlight filtered through amber. The Velhari dockmaster, Counselor Zathavan, had processed over 40,000 species in his career. He had cataloged warriors, predators, hive minds, and gas beings with no physical form at all. But when the small human female stepped off Shuttle Bay 9, alone, unarmed, carrying nothing but a battered canvas bag and a half-eaten nutrition bar, he had simply smiled to himself. Harmless, he thought. Completely, utterly harmless, he would spend the next 72 hours desperately trying to forget how wrong he was. The station at the edge of everything Meridian Crosspoint was not a place you chose to visit. It was a place the galaxy's forgotten ended up, orbiting a dying red dwarf star at the very edge of the contested corridor, a stretch of space claimed by no fewer than 11 different interstellar governments, all of whom hated each other. Meridian Crosspoint served as a neutral trading hub, a black market, a refugee processing station, and, depending on who you asked, the single most dangerous 4.7 kilometers of pressurized corridor in the known universe. 43 species called it home. None of them were human. Humans, as far as the galaxy was concerned, were a curio, a footnote, a young, soft, short-lived species from a moderately sized planet in an unfashionable spiral arm, who had only recently figured out faster-than-light travel and still argued amongst themselves about which of their many governments was the legitimate one. The Velhari, tall, silver-skinned, four-armed, and deeply convinced of their own superiority, had a phrase for newly spacefaring species. Habnor, loosely translated, the ones who still need protecting from themselves. Humans were textbook Habnor. Everyone on Meridian Crosspoint knew this. Everyone on Meridian Crosspoint was about to receive a very thorough education. She arrives. Her name, according to the arrival manifest, was Dr. Lena Vasquez. Age, 29 Earth Standard Years. Occupation, xenobiological field researcher, contracted to the Pan-Species Science Collective. Height, 1.67 meters. Weight, 61 kilograms. Threat classification, 0. Counselor Zathavan had processed her entry documents with the mild disinterest of someone filing paperwork for a houseplant. She was small, even by human standards, he had been told. Dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. Wearing a jacket that was at least 2 sizes too large for her. The nutrition bar she was eating was some kind of compressed earth grain product, and she was eating it with the focused intensity of someone who had not eaten in some time. She looked, in Zathavan's professional estimation, like a strong atmospheric gust might carry her away. Dr. Vasquez, he said, sliding her processed ID chip across the counter. Welcome to Meridian Crosspoint. Standard residency rules apply. No discharge of energy weapons in pressurized zones. No unsanctioned biological material transfers. No interfering with active trade negotiations. She looked up from her nutrition bar. What about sanctioned biological material transfers? She asked. He blinked his 4 vertical eyelids. Those require a Tier 3 permit from the station authority. Great. She smiled. How long does a Tier 3 permit take? Approximately 3 standard weeks. She nodded slowly. Took another bite of her nutrition bar. And the black market version? Zathavan stared at her. She stared back. Still smiling. Eyes still warm. Still soft. Still completely, utterly harmless. I don't know what you're referring to, he said carefully. Of course not. She picked up her ID chip, shouldered her battered bag. Thanks for the help, counselor. And she walked, unhurried, into the belly of Meridian Crosspoint. Zathavan watched her go. He had a strange feeling he couldn't name that he decided to ignore it. The station's underbelly. What the official station maps called the lower commercial tier, everyone else called the gutworks. It was exactly what it sounded like. A labyrinthine tangle of corridors, maintenance shafts, unlicensed vendor stalls, and dimly lit establishments that offered services the station authority preferred not to officially acknowledge. The air in the gutworks was thick with the metabolic byproducts of 43 species, a smell that had been described by first-time visitors as everything from a spice market on fire to the inside of a biology classroom after something went wrong. Lena Vasquez walked through it like she'd been born there, which, in a metaphorical sense, she kind of had. She had grown up in Medellin, Colombia, a city that sat at 1,500 meters above sea level in the Andes Mountains, ringed by jungles so dense that entire ecosystems existed within a single hectare. She had spent her childhood hiking trails where the flora produced contact toxins. The fauna included ambush predators capable of clearing 4 meters in a single lunge, and the weather could shift from clear skies to life-threatening electrical storms in under 20 minutes. She had done her undergraduate fieldwork in the Congo Basin rainforest, tracking fungal networks through terrain that most researchers refused to enter without armed escort. Her doctoral research had taken her to the Marianas Trench analog environments in the Pacific, underwater systems operating under pressures that could collapse an unprotected human body like a paper cup, studying organisms that thrived in conditions that most of the galaxy would classify as lethally uninhabitable. She had been bitten, stung, scratched, hypothermic, dehydrated, temporarily blinded by bioluminescent defensive secretions, and on one memorable occasion, mildly poisoned by a toad she had not realized was sitting on her sample case. She had documented all of it, finished her fieldwork, and published 3 papers. None of this was on her arrival manifest. Her threat classification remained 0. The contact. She found who she was looking for in a Gutworks establishment called the Slow Burn, a title that referred, allegedly, to the proprietor's specialty fermented beverages, though the regulars agreed it also described what happened to your decision-making capacity after the 3rd round. He was a Threnki, a species that resembled, to human eyes, someone who had taken a large mantis and given it the general body plan of a spider, then dressed it in a merchant's vest. 6 limbs. Compound eyes the color of old copper. A name that translated, roughly, as he who counts carefully. Most people called him Tick. Tick was, depending on your perspective, either a highly successful independent trader or the most prolific smuggler currently operating in the contested corridor. The station authority had been trying to build a case against him for 11 years. They remained optimistic. He saw Lena the moment she walked in, and his copper eyes tracked her with the lazy attention of a predator who had already decided the approaching creature wasn't worth moving for. "Human," he said, by way of greeting. "Tick," she replied, sitting across from him without being invited. His mandibles shifted, something that might have been amusement, or irritation, or both. "You were told not to come back to this station." "I was told a lot of things," she said. "I came back anyway. The hegemony has a contract on your research data." "I know. The Vex Syndicate has a contract on you." She considered this. "How much?" Tick's compound eyes glittered. "Enough that I'm having a very interesting internal debate right now." Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and set something on the table between them. It was a small specimen container, sealed, pressurized, marked with classification codes that made Tick go very, very still. "Is that," he began, "a live culture of Cordyceps novistellaris?" she said quietly. "Yes." The table went silent. In the dim light of the slow burn, Tick stared at the container with an expression that translated across species boundaries with perfect clarity. Pure, undiluted awe. Cordyceps novistellaris, nicknamed the starweave fungus by the researchers who discovered it in deep ocean hydrothermal environments, was not just a scientific curiosity. It was, potentially, the most significant xenobiological discovery in 3 decades. A fungal organism whose mycelial network produced compounds that interacted with neural tissue across multiple species in ways that current science could barely begin to map. Medicinal applications, neurological applications, applications that certain parties, both legitimate and otherwise, would pay almost anything to get their hands on. "You found it," Tick said. His voice had gone strange. "You actually found it. Found it, cultured it, and kept it alive through 42 days of fieldwork in conditions that would have killed most of the research teams that tried before me." She picked up the container and put it back in her jacket. "I need a secure lab space. Off the official manifest. And I need the station authority to not know I'm here for at least 72 hours. Tick was quiet for a long moment. "The Vex Syndicate will be a problem I handle," she said, "when they become a problem." He looked at her. Really looked. The way species who relied on compound vision could sometimes see things single lens eyes missed. The warmth in her eyes was still there. The softness was still there. But there was something else now, too. Something that had always been there, he realized, and that he had simply not looked for before. Something quiet, patient, watchful. Something that, In the taxonomy of the natural world, you found not in prey animals, but in hunters. 72 hours, he said finally. I'll see what I can do. What the galaxy doesn't understand about humans. Here is something the Velhari Hegemony's xenobiological classification database said about humans. Homo sapiens, carbon-based bipedal species. Lifespan, 70 to 90 standard years. Physical capabilities, below galactic median for strength, speed, and sensory acuity. Notable features, large brain-to-body ratio. High social complexity. Significant technological capability relative to species age. Threat classification, low-moderate. Primary vulnerability, environmental sensitivity. Species originated on Class M planet Earth, notable for high biodiversity and moderate geological activity. Here is what the Velhari Hegemony's xenobiological classification database did not say. Earth, officially designated by the Pan-Species Science Collective as a death world. A planet so saturated with biological competition, geological violence, and environmental extremity that the organisms it produced were, by necessity, among the most resilient, adaptable, and fundamentally dangerous in the catalog galaxy. The gravity alone, 9.8 meters per second squared, was higher than 73% of inhabited worlds. Humans had evolved under this gravity for millions of years. Their bone density, their muscle fiber composition, their cardiovascular architecture, all of it built to operate under conditions that would exhaust or injure beings from lower gravity worlds within ours. Earth's atmosphere contained 21% oxygen, a concentration so reactive that the first species to analyze it had classified Earth as a slow-burning chemical disaster. Humans breathed it constantly. Their cells had evolved antioxidant systems of remarkable sophistication to manage oxidative stress levels that would damage the tissues of most other known species. The human immune system, a subject of genuine fascination among xenobiologists, was not merely a defensive mechanism. It was an aggressive, constantly learning, extraordinarily adaptive biological warfare apparatus. Humans had evolved on a planet where microscopic organisms were in continuous evolutionary arms races with their hosts. The result was an immune system that could, given time and exposure, adapt to pathogens that would devastate other species entirely. Human pain tolerance. Human thermal regulation. The only persistence hunters in the known catalog of sapient species, capable of running prey animals to exhaustion in Earth's heat through a combination of sweat-based cooling and biomechanical efficiency that no other sapient species had independently evolved. Human endurance. Human capacity to continue functioning under levels of injury, stress, sleep deprivation, and nutritional deficit that would incapacitate most beings. None of this was in the threat classification database. The threat classification said, low-moderate. The threat classification was, to put it scientifically, completely wrong. The Vex Syndicate arrives. They came on the second day. 4 of them. Vex breed, which meant they were from a species that had been selectively recruited, some said engineered, by the Syndicate over generations for a specific purpose, enforcement. They were large, heavily built, exoskeletal plating over their upper bodies that served as natural armor. 4-fingered hands designed to grip and crush. Visual systems that operated across the ultraviolet spectrum, making standard light concealment useless against them. They were, by every measurable metric, more physically formidable than a human being. They found Lena in Tick's secondary storage bay, 3 levels below the Gutworks, where she had converted a corner into a functional field laboratory with the focused efficiency of someone who had set up research stations in considerably worse conditions. The lead enforcer, designation Orcs 7, looked at her. She was crouched over a specimen analysis kit, running a mycelial growth assay, and she did not look up when they came in. Dr. Vasquez, Orcs 7 said. His translator rendered it in flat, even tones. You have something that belongs to the Vex Syndicate. That's interesting, she said, still not looking up, because I don't recall the Vex Syndicate doing 42 days of fieldwork in a hydrothermal vent system at 400 meters depth. The research was conducted under a contract that transfers intellectual property rights to. A contract I never signed, she said, which your employers obtained by forging my signature on a backdated commission agreement, which is not only illegal under Pan-Species Science Collective Charter law, but also under the Velhari hegemony's intellectual property statutes, contested corridor trade agreement Article 7, and about 6 other legal frameworks I could name if you'd like me to continue. Silence. Give us the culture, Corex 7 said, and we leave without incident. She set down her analysis tool, stood up slowly, turned to face them for the first time. And Corex 7 had the strangest experience of his professional career. He had expected fear, even a small amount of resignation. The standard response of a physically inferior being facing 4 armed enforcers in an enclosed space with no exit. What he saw instead was calm, not the brittle calm of someone suppressing panic, not the resignation of someone who had run out of options, something older, quieter, a stillness that his species' instincts, honed over thousands of years of evolutionary history, filed, without his conscious permission, under a category he did not like to think about. Apex predator. Pre-strike stillness. I'm going to explain something to you, Lena said. Her voice was perfectly level. And I'd like you to listen carefully, because I'm going to say it once. She reached into her jacket. Every enforcer in the room tensed. She produced the specimen container. This culture, she said, is alive. It requires specific temperature maintenance, specific atmospheric composition, and specific handling protocols that I am currently the only person on this station qualified to provide. She turned the container slowly in her hands. If anything happens to me, if I am incapacitated, injured, or removed from this station against my will, I cannot maintain it. An alive culture of Cordyceps novus stellaris that is not properly maintained will not remain viable. She looked at Corex 7. Your employers, she said, want this sample alive. Because a dead sample is scientifically interesting but commercially worthless. And the only thing standing between them and a commercially worthless dead sample is me. A long, long silence. You're using yourself as a shield, Corex 7 said. I'm using myself as a necessity, she corrected. There's a difference. Shields can be broken. Necessities have to be protected. Corex 7 stared at her. She stared back. The warmth in her eyes was still there. The softness was still there. And underneath it, patient, watchful, utterly unafraid, something that made every ancient instinct in Corex 7's body whisper a single word. Careful. We'll be in contact, he said finally. And he left. His team followed him. Lena watched them go. Then she turned back to her specimen analysis kit, crouched down, and picked up exactly where she had left off. Her hands were completely steady. What she carried. That night, by station time, which meant the corridor lights dimmed to 40% and the gutworks grew quieter in a relative sense. Tick found her still in the storage bay, eating a field ration she had apparently produced from her battered bag with the nonchalance of someone who had packed for exactly this situation. He settled into a folding cargo seat across from her and regarded her with his copper compound eyes. Corex 7 is not a patient being, he said. No, she agreed. He will come back. With more people. Probably. And your argument about the culture's viability buys time. Not indefinitely. She ate another bite of her ration. I need 72 hours. Long enough to complete the preliminary analysis and transmit the data to a secure science collective archive. Once it's in the archive, the syndicate loses its leverage. The data exists independently of the physical culture. The culture becomes scientifically important, but no longer exclusively valuable. Tick was quiet for a moment. And if they decide the culture isn't worth having if you've already shared the data? If they come back not to take it, but to destroy it? And me? Yes. She looked at him. The field ration container sat open in her hands, forgotten for a moment. Then, she said, we have a different kind of problem. Are you afraid? She considered the question with what appeared to be genuine thoughtfulness. I grew up running trails in the Andes where the biggest cat on the continent could kill a deer in seconds, she said. I did field work in rainforests where the trees themselves produced defensive compounds toxic enough to cause neurological damage. I spent 6 weeks in a submersible at depths where the pressure outside the hull was enough to kill an unprotected human in under a minute. She picked up her ration again. I've been afraid plenty of times. Fear is useful. Fear keeps you paying attention. But right now I'm calculating, she said. Fear comes after. Tick was quiet for a long moment. You humans, he said finally. Your classification files say you're a young species. Vulnerable. Not yet fully adapted to the realities of galactic civilization. The files are wrong, aren't they? It wasn't quite a question. She smiled. And it was the same smile she'd given Zethavan at the docking bay, warm, soft, seemingly guileless. We're the only sapient species in the known catalog, she said quietly, that evolved on a planet classified as a death world. Everything else out there, Velhari, Threnki, Vexbreed, every species on this station, evolved on worlds that were, by comparison, comfortable. She set down her ration. We evolved on a planet that was trying to kill us from the moment we climbed out of the trees. Our gravity, our atmosphere, our predators, our pathogens, our weather, our geology, all of it was trying to end us, every single day, for millions of years. She looked at Tick. And we're still here, she said. Not just surviving. Studying. Exploring. Reaching for the stars. A pause. The files aren't wrong, she said. We're just not what the files are looking for. Hour 47. The second approach came not through the storage bay doors, but through a maintenance access tunnel. A flanking maneuver that suggested Corex 7 had acquired both a station map and a more serious operational plan. There were 8 of them this time, and they had brought a signal jammer, which they activated the moment they were inside, cutting her off from any external communication. Lena had been expecting something like this. She had spent the intervening hours doing 3 things simultaneously: running her analysis, preparing for the data transmission, and thinking very carefully about the geometry of the storage bay. She was, at her core, a field researcher. And field researchers, the ones who survived, at least, were specialists in a particular cognitive skill that rarely appeared in any species threat classification database. Environmental adaptation. The ability to take an unfamiliar, potentially hostile environment and, within a short time, understand it. Map it. Find its affordances and its vulnerabilities. Know instinctively where the danger would come from, where the exits were, where the advantages lay. It was not a skill she had learned from a textbook. It was something older than textbooks. Something coded into her at a level below conscious thought. Because on Earth, the organisms that couldn't do this, the organisms that walked into new environments without that constant, automatic threat assessment running in the background, were the organisms that didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. She had known about the maintenance tunnel since Hour 3. She had known about the second tunnel, the one Corex 7's team didn't know she knew about, since Hour 4. When the 8 enforcers filed into the storage bay and found it empty except for a still-running analysis kit and an open field ration container, there was a moment of confused stillness. Corex 7 looked at the specimen container, sitting open on the workbench. Empty. She moved it, someone said. She knew we were coming, said another. Corex 7 stood very still. He looked at the empty container. He looked at the running analysis kit. He looked at the field ration, half-eaten, sitting as if its owner had simply stepped away for a moment. And then, with the slow, cold certainty of a being whose professional instincts were finally, belatedly, correctly calibrating to the situation, he understood. The running analysis kit wasn't abandoned. It was connected to something. Still transmitting. Still operating. The empty specimen container wasn't evidence that the culture was gone. It was a decoy. And the half-eaten field ration wasn't carelessness. It was a message. I was here. I saw you coming. I chose to leave before you arrived. Not running. Not hiding. Repositioning. Find her, Corex 7 said. His voice was flat. Now, what persistence hunting looks like in a space station. She did not run. Running, in an enclosed environment with a species that had superior sensory range and numerical advantage, was a losing strategy. It burned energy, generated noise, and covered ground in a predictable fashion that could be anticipated and cut off. Instead, she moved. Not quickly, not frantically, carefully. Through maintenance shafts, she had mapped over 47 hours of quiet observation. Through utility corridors that didn't appear on the standard station layout because they predated the last 3 renovation cycles and had simply been built over and forgotten. Through a ventilation bypass that she had located by reading the airflow patterns in the lower gutworks, the kind of environmental reading that most people never thought to do, and that she did without thinking, the same way she would have read a jungle canopy for predator movement or a cave wall for evidence of recent flooding. She was not, in the traditional sense, a fighter. She had no weapons. She had no combat training beyond a basic wilderness survival course she'd taken before her first solo fieldwork expedition, which had covered things like building emergency shelters and treating hypothermia rather than anything useful in the current situation. What she had was something that most of the galaxy's tactical training programs had never thought to classify as a combat advantage. Patience. The human capacity for patience. Real patience. The kind that could run prey across kilometers of open savanna for hours without losing focus. The kind that had allowed human hunters to track prey for days before making a move. Was not something that appeared in any fighting manual. But patience was a weapon. Patience was what let you wait until your opponent made a mistake. Patience was what let you stay in an uncomfortable position, cramped, cold, barely breathing, for long enough that the people looking for you made assumptions and moved on. She waited in the ventilation bypass for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She ate the rest of her field ration. She reviewed her analysis data on a portable device. She transmitted a partial dataset to the Science Collective archive. Not the whole thing, not yet, but enough that if something went wrong, the discovery wasn't lost. And she waited. The mistake. Every hunt. And she had learned this in rainforests and ocean floors and mountain trails. Eventually produced a mistake. Not from the hunter. From the hunted. Corex 7's mistake was the signal jammer. It was a good piece of equipment. Broad spectrum. It blocked her from communicating with TIC, with the Science Collective, with anyone outside the immediate area. What it also did, and what no one in the Vex Syndicate's operational planning had apparently considered, was block the Station Authority's routine maintenance sensor sweeps. Meridian Crosspoint Station Authority was not, by Galactic standards, an impressive organization. Underfunded, understaffed, perpetually frustrated by the Gutworks' various unlicensed activities, which it was nominally supposed to regulate, and practically incapable of controlling. But it did have automated systems. And one of those automated systems monitored for signal jamming equipment, because signal jammers on a space station were, for obvious reasons, considered a significant safety hazard. If a jammer disabled emergency communication in the wrong section during a hull breach or atmospheric failure, the resulting casualty count could be catastrophic. The moment Corex 7 activated the jammer, a quiet alert had begun climbing through the Station Authority's automated triage system. It took 2 hours and 17 minutes to reach a human, a Velhari, technically, but the comparison holds. Desk officer who looked at it, recognized the sector, thought about what was in that sector, and made a call. What followed was not, by Galactic standards, an impressive law enforcement response. It was 6 Station Authority officers in ill-fitting uniforms with a sensor array and a warrant they had spent 40 minutes arguing about how to correctly fill out. But it was enough. Enough to create noise, confusion, competing priorities for Corex 7's team. Enough that 3 of his 8 enforcers were suddenly dealing with an official Station Authority inquiry rather than a search operation. Enough to create a window. 68 hours. She came out of the ventilation bypass, not dramatically, not heroically, with the measured, purposeful economy of movement of someone who had calculated exactly how much time and energy she had and was allocating both with precision. She went back to the storage bay. The remaining 5 enforcers had left 2 behind to watch it. She went around them, through the tunnel they still didn't know about. She reached her analysis kit. 44 seconds to pull the final dataset. 91 seconds to complete the transmission protocol. The data hit the Science Collective's secure archive at hours 68 and 57 minutes. She stood in the dim storage bay, portable device in her hand, and watched the confirmation code appear on the screen. Then she sat down on a cargo crate and allowed herself, for the first time in 69 hours, to take a slow, deep breath. What Corex 7 reported. His mission debrief, filed with the Vex Syndicate's operational division the following day, was notable for several things. First, for its length, considerably longer than standard, as if the author was working through something. Second, for a section near the end, under assessment of target, which read as follows. Target, human female. Dr. Lena Vasquez, age 29. Physical profile, within normal human parameters. No augmentation detected. No weapons. No combat training on record. Numerically and physically inferior to enforcement team at all contact points. Target successfully evaded an 8-person enforcement team with signal jamming equipment for a period of approximately 11 hours in a confined station environment. Target achieved primary objective, data transmission, within the operational window despite active opposition. Target made no aggressive moves at any point, incurred no injuries, and was located post-transmission voluntarily, presenting herself to station authority custody. Note for future operational planning. Human physical threat classification is categorically insufficient. Standard metrics, strength, speed, sensory range, do not capture the relevant threat parameters for this species. Recommend reassessment. Specific parameters requiring reassessment. Environmental analysis capability. Patience. Psychological stability under duress. Strategic thinking under resource constraint. Endurance. Personal note, not for official record. She knew where we were the whole time. I don't know when I realized this. I think I realized it when we found the empty container and I understood what it meant. She had not been evading us reactively. She had been managing us. The entire operation, from our entry to the authority response, had developed in a way that, in retrospect, produced outcomes consistent with her objectives at each stage. I do not know if this was planned or adaptive. I suspect it was both. I have been in this profession for 18 years. I have pursued targets from 11 species. This is the first time I have walked away from an operation with the genuine conviction that the target was never, at any point, in the situation she appeared to be in. She looked like prey. She wasn't. I don't know what she was. I know what we call it, back home, when something looks harmless and isn't. We call it a mimic predator. In my professional opinion, that's what humans are. Asterisk. What Zethavan remembered. 3 days after Dr. Lena Vasquez left Meridian Crosspoint, voluntarily, with her specimen culture properly permitted under a Tier 3 documentation package that she had somehow managed to file and get approved through the station authority during her voluntary custody period, Counselor Zethavan found himself thinking about that moment at the docking bay. The nutrition bar, the soft eyes, the question about the black market Tier 3 permit, asked with a smile that made it seem like a joke. He thought about the way she had walked into the Gutworks. He pulled her arrival file. Reread it. Threat classification, 0. He thought about a Vex Syndicate enforcement team that had spent 11 hours trying to locate one small human in a 4.7-kilometer station and had not managed it. He thought about the data transmission that had made the cover of the Pan-Species Science Collective's monthly bulletin, the most significant xenobiological discovery in 30 years, attributed to one Dr. Lena Vasquez, who was described in the bulletin as a field researcher of exceptional dedication and resourcefulness. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The strange feeling from 3 days ago was back. The one he hadn't been able to name. He had a name for it now. He'd felt it once before, years ago, when he'd been young and hiking in the mountains of his homeworld, and had turned around to find that he had, without noticing, walked directly past a camouflaged apex predator that could have taken him apart without effort. The predator had simply watched him go. It hadn't needed to do anything else. He sat with the feeling for a long moment. Then he opened his xenobiological classification database, found the entry for Homo sapiens, and flagged it for comprehensive revision. In the notes field, he typed 3 words. Threat classification, insufficient. He paused. Then he added a 4th. Significantly, somewhere else entirely. 6 weeks later. A different station. A different part of the contested corridor. A Velhari researcher. Young, recently graduated, first solo posting. Was reviewing the updated xenobiological threat assessment for Homo sapiens that had recently circulated through the Hegemony's academic network. He read it carefully. Read the revised classification. Read the supporting case documentation, which included Corex 7's debrief and Zethavan's notes. He sat back and thought about it. Then he looked up, because there was a new arrival processing through the station's entry bay, and something made him look. She was small. Human. Dark hair, braid a bit loose from what looked like a long journey. Jacket 2 sizes too large. Battered canvas bag over one shoulder. She was eating a nutrition bar with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't eaten recently. The dockmaster processed her entry documents with mild disinterest. The young researcher looked at her threat classification. 0. He looked at the updated assessment on his screen. He looked back at her. She was smiling at something the dockmaster had said. Warm, soft, easy. Completely, utterly harmless. The young researcher took a long breath. Then he picked up his communication device and sent a quiet message to the station's security coordinator. New human arrival. Single individual. Appears non-threatening. Recommend we pay close attention. He paused. Added one more line. Trust me on this. The human walked deeper into the station. The galaxy, slowly, was learning. But it was a big galaxy. And it had a lot left to learn. She never raised her voice. She never threw a punch. She had no weapons, no backup, no armor. She had something older than all of those things. Something forged in jungles and ocean floors and mountain ranges over millions of years of fighting just to exist on the most dangerous rock in the cataloged galaxy. She had the mind of a Deathworld organism. And in the end, that was enough. That's the story. And if it hit you somewhere deep, if you felt something watching this, that's not an accident. That's what HFY does. It reminds you what you actually are. Human. Forged in fire. Built to survive. Born to reach the stars. If you want more stories that remind the galaxy, and you, what humanity is truly capable of, hit that subscribe button. New HFY stories dropping regularly on Humans Hit Different. Join the family. The galaxy is waiting. Bell subscribe. The stars aren't going to conquer themselves.